The B&M Historical Society, I'd like to welcome you all to the Plymouth, New Hampshire Railroad Station, which we are so fortunate to be able to use. And you've probably noticed we have Amtrak service out here now. We're not sure where it goes, but there's 2 cars out here.
Sleepers only.
So, yeah, sleepers, yeah. No, it's a half coach too. So we got some coach seats. I don't know what time, you would know. What time are we leaving, Peter?
Anytime in the next 5 hours.
Yeah. Well, like I say, you know, we like to do this presentation up here. What better place than a Boston and Maine Railroad Station? So like I say, I'd like to thank you all for coming. We do have some complimentary waters over there, so if anyone's thirsty, there's water. And then obviously you saw we have some of our products back here. Today's program is going to be by an old acquaintance of mine.
Old? Antique.
Antique. I'd call him a friend, but I've only known him 35 years and he doesn't consider me a friend yet. Because Gary has friends, good friends, and very good friends, and I'm not even on that list, he told me. Yeah. But
Takes a while.
yeah, it takes a while. It also takes a certain person like Gary, because he has my wife making him sandwiches. Yeah, peanut butter and jelly is what Gary likes. Well, I guess we'll cut to the chase here. Everyone, a lot of you guys know Gary, so you know you're in for an interesting little treat here. Gary started with the Penn Central Railroad, and I'm going to let him give his own introduction, because I'm going to do it wrong, and he'll tell me that later. So, Gary, you take them, you put it near your mouth, and you talk.
Like this?
See, no one's hearing you. See?
Better? All right.
Thanks for coming.
I'm just going to start off by telling you a little bit about my history with the railroads. When I was a kid, we lived in New Britain, Connecticut. New Britain was the hardware city of the world. So if you built a house in the middle of the country in 1900, everything but the wood and glass came from New Britain. So New Britain had a big railroad presence. There was a junction there, all the big factories, Stanley Works. And there was a good-sized yard there. And we lived a few hundred yards away from the yard. And as I was growing up, my parents both worked. It was unusual at that time in history for my mother to work, or women to work, actually. So I had a babysitter, who incidentally just passed away a couple months ago at 97 years old. So Johanna lived in an apartment house with her parents. She would take me down to the yards because one of their tenants was an engineer, New Haven engineer, and he was at the end of his career, so he bid in the New Britain job because he could walk to work. So they'd bring me down there and I'd ride around on a 44-tonner while they flat switched the yard, which was a thrill. And and I really don't remember much of that. And as I got a little older, we played around in those yards on Sundays, afternoons, you know, crawling around the boxcars and everything like that. Years later, I ended up the conductor on that job. So my parents, we'd get 2 weeks off a year. We'd go to our place in Maine. So I got familiar with the B&M and the Maine Central. And then my grandmother lived in Binghamton, New York. And I got familiar on the trips with the part of New Haven, the New York Central again, the D&H. And my grandparents lived near the main line for the DL&W and the Erie. My mother's uncles were Erie conductors. My great-grandfather was a DL&W engineer. My grandfather worked for the D&H for a while when he was young. So the railroading was in me. Never occurred to me to try to get a job on a railroad. I was 26 years old. I owned a dive shop, scuba diving. I had been a lifeguard when I was younger and teaching swimming and then teaching diving. So I opened up a dive shop, which happened to be right next to the B&M Maine, or the New Haven Main line in my hometown. One day we're out in front, my friend Carl Zimmerman and I. Carl says to me, and the train's going by, Carl says, my father's gonna throw me out of the house, I gotta get a job. So just, I don't know where it came from. I said, why don't you go get a job on the railroad? And I was surprised he couldn't get a job. His father was vice president of Pratt & Whitney. So I don't think he wanted to go in the shops anyway. Carl comes back in 2 weeks, puts down $351 on my desk, and he says, this is my first week's pay. Next day, I got in a car and went to New Haven to try to get a job on the railroad. So I go in the New Haven headquarters, beautiful building. They called it the Yellow Building. And in the sidewalks out in front, New York, New Haven, and Hartford, right in the sidewalk, beautiful building. So I got to see somebody, and I said, I'd like to get a job on the railroad. He says, we're not hiring, we're in the largest bankruptcy in the history of the country. I said, so, I still want a job on the railroad. He said, no. So he said, you can put an application in, and you never know, we'll call you. And I said, I'll call you every day. What time do you get back from lunch? And I did. Finally. A couple weeks later, they called me up. Come on, take an exam. So I went down there, took a written exam, eye exam. He says, meet this guy down at the station in New Haven. And I go down there, meet this guy. He's in the yard. He says, go up in a boxcar, put it, wind the handbrake on, knock it off. Open the knuckle, close the knuckle, open the angle cock, close the angle cock. Okay, you're all done, go home, we'll call you. That was my test. About 3 or 4 days later, they call me up. I go to Hartford, Connecticut, Windsor Street Yard. I'm gonna be on a yard switcher for the day, and that started my career. I got on the engine. Conductor said, and I'm supposed to learn from the old timers. And I got on the engine, the conductor said to me, sit down and don't touch anything, and stay right here. So the old timers didn't care much for newbies. They had everything done like a science, especially switching and flat switching in the yards and that sort of thing. And that's where it started, 1970, Penn Central. And I loved it. One of the first jobs I had, we were taking a drag of cars, about 15, 20 cars over to East Hartford. So we get over to East Hartford. Now this is late at night, probably 1 o'clock in the morning. We get over to East Hartford. Conductor says to me, close the angle cock on the engine and bleed the train off. So what they're gonna do is you bleed the train off, then they're gonna flat switch in the yard. Just kick the cars down different tracks. All right, so I did my job. And I go up to the freight house, and I go in the freight house, and they're all sleeping. They got all mattresses hidden away, and they all go to bed. And I'm like an owl wandering around out there. So I'm learning real quick how the railroad works. So that's the beginning. Beginning was in Hartford. I'm working now local freights and building up seniority. When you hire out on the railroad, you hired out, in my case, as a brakeman. When you're hired out as a brakeman, you can't ride in a caboose for at least 6 months until you take a test and get set up as a flagman. So So 6 months later, I get set up as a flagman, and I can ride in a caboose. A year later, you get set up as a conductor, and now you can control the job. So I went through all that and did all that, and worked with some great old timers. All these guys hired out in the steam days. So it's like being a kid running the trains around the Christmas tree. All of a sudden, they're real. And I'm going to tell you a few stories about, if I can find my cheat sheet. First one was, we're at a club one night. I'm young and I'm still clubbing and doing this and that. Some friends of mine said to me, I want to do something tonight that I'll never forget. I said, all right. So we went down to Plainville, Connecticut. Plainville was an outlying point on a railroad. An outlying point meant that there was a couple engines there, but nobody around. And in those days, the engines weren't shut off. They were idled all weekend. So I just took my friends down and got aboard one engine. It was tied onto a caboose and took them for a nice 10-mile round trip. And never got caught. So those, no, that's not it yet. Just stuck it in my pocket. So we stole the train. And there was about 10 of us on it. They frown upon that, on those kind of antics. So next, cheat sheet. I now built up seniority where I'm the conductor on in that yard that I was telling you about when we started. NX21, Hartford, Connecticut to New Britain, Connecticut to Waterbury, Connecticut, Plainville, Connecticut. I'm at that same club one night. I leave the club about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm back going to my apartment in New Britain. I come around the corner and there's 2 police cruisers sitting in the middle of the road. I very nicely told them what I thought about this, and off to jail I went. Left the car there, go with them to the police station. I get one phone call. I call a friend of mine whose apartment I'm staying at, and I said, call the railroad, tell them what happened. I'm not going to be at work tomorrow. Next day, about noontime, they come up and says, all right, you're out of here. So the jails were upstairs, and you had to walk downstairs to the lobby and out the door. So I get down the stairs and walking down, I see this commotion. And whoever's in the lobby behind the desk, they're all heading for the front door. So I get down there, I look out the door, and across the road, on the railroad tracks, is a brand new Conrail locomotive, and on the long hood is a sign that says, Free Gurske. So you can imagine what was going through. So I got out, I walked to get my stuff, and I walked out the door across the road, got on the engine, and away we went. So that's one thing. In the 70s, there was an energy crisis. So we're going to burn wood. My apartment, and my friend owns a house, he's going to burn wood. So one of the best places to get wood for us was the cars that we used to shove cars up to Stanley Works. Stanley Works in New Britain, Connecticut would get about 5, 6 cars a day of coiled steel. Coiled steel was held in the cars by 4x4, 8-foot long pieces of hardwood. So we'd shove the cars up, pick the empties up, bring them down to the yard, put the empties up against the caboose, and then as we left town, went to the next town, I had a chainsaw in the caboose. So I go in the gondolas while the train's moving, take the wood, shove it into the caboose and cut it up. And then I had an old Divco milk truck. And trying to find my glasses. And I used the milk truck to go pick up the wood. And then one day after the job, I get back and on my windshield is a note. And I'll read you the note. It says to Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe was Joe Daly, the train master. Conductor Gary Gurske is a bag of dirt. He shows total lack of interest in his job. I'm referring to Thursday 1/8/76 as for instance. When the train stopped twice en route back to Hartford to check for brakes on, there wasn't any signs of interest at all from the caboose. Not even a head stuck out to look. Well, the brakeman found the problem was a retainer valve on. Okay, I think they sleep on the job. There's sounds coming from the caboose. Sounds like snoring, or more like sawing wood. But who would saw wood in a caboose? I'll keep you informed of this dirtbag's performance. Yours truly, Rotten Rodney Brakeman. So that's what we were doing. We were sawing the wood in the hack for P&W. 1973. There's a Railfan magazine around Christmas. One sentence in the back: Providence and Worcester Railroad orders 5 MLWs from Canada. I go to work the next day. I'm working with a guy named George Damasi. He's a big union guy. I say to George, what's a P&W Railroad? He says, there's no such thing. And I knew right away. He knew everything. He had to. A couple of weeks later, he comes up and he says, you want a free dinner? He says, you know that P&W Railroad you asked about? He said, they're starting up. They're going to have a dinner in Providence on Federal Hill. You want to go and see what it's all about? I said, yeah. He says, you got to drive. All right. So I was lucky at the time. I had a big Cadillac, and they wanted to look right when I brought him over. There was him and another guy, Art Murphy, big union guy. So I drive over Providence, Federal Hill, Italian restaurant. We walk in. Our 2 guys disappear. I go in a room, it's a porch, and television's on, a bunch of guys in there, I don't know anybody. So I'm standing next to a couch, TV's on, baseball game. Old guy sitting next to me on the couch hits me in the leg. Boom. Points at the TV, he says, I know that guy. I said, who? He said, Ted Williams. I said to him, my parents hang around with him and his wife, which was true. My father was under contract with the New York Yankees back in the 40s. They knew everybody. I was never into sports, so I never paid any attention. But that part of it was true. So now the old guy's my best friend. They call for dinner. He says, you come and sit with me. So we go down over and have dinner, start dinner. I've got the menu in my hand. He grabs the menu out of my hand. He says, I'll order. I'm not used to people telling me what to do. He said, get the steak. It's about 3 pounds, half a cow. You're going to love it. We have dinner. Now, the Providence and Worcester Railroad was leased to the New Haven 100 years ago. But in the 1970s, all these old leases were running out. B&M, same thing. So the P&W, a guy named Bob Eater, he's going to take the railroad back because his family has old stock in the railroad. So that's the meeting. The meeting is basically they're going to hire Providence guys to work on the new Providence and Worcester Railroad. So the train master gets up, who's going to be the train master for the Providence and Worcester. He's the brother of one of the guys I bring over there. The Providence guys hate this guy. They try to kill him. They're throwing brake shoes at his car. And so Penn Central moves him to Pennsylvania. Now P&W brings him back, and he's going to run the P&W Railroad. So he gets up and talks to the guys. He says, this is a new railroad. I'm a new guy. Everything's new. We're going to start all over again. Providence guy says, we're not working for you. Old guy next to me slides me over a piece of paper. He says, sign this. You're working for us now. I said, geez, no. I conducted on a Penn Central. I got this great job. You're going to want to work for us. You need anything, you need a house, you need a car, we got our own bank. I signed the paper. Went to work for the P&W. First employee. So we go to school for a week or two to get familiar with the RS-3 engines that they rented from the D&H. Now I'm going to run the first job, which is what we're going to do is we're going to pick up 38 cars in Worcester, bring them down to Valley Falls, switch them out, and that's it. So we find out that Penn Central pulling a trick on us. Instead of dropping them in Worcester, they bring them around the horn and drop them off in Providence. So now I got to go down cab lights, engine and a caboose, to Providence, pick up the cars, bring them to Valley Falls. So away we go. We get down there, tie on to the train. Brakeman goes out, checks to hit 2 cars, see if the handbrakes, get them off. Okay, pump up the train, we're ready to go. I can't move it, which is very unusual. Brakeman goes out, there's 38 cars, there's 38 handbrakes on it. So I stay on a P&W for about 6 months. And I'm on the job one day with the guy that I brought over there in the first place, this George Damashi. And we're switching, it's a tough move, a diagonal crossing across a main street. And New Haven even had red lights on the engines, so nobody would run into them. And George is not used to me being an engineer. I'm usually his brakeman. And he's being tough with me. And you're still relatively new at this, and you're running an engine. And one of the things railroad guys would say is if I'm doing something, I put a little too much air on and I slow down too much, they would yell over, what are we stopping here for? That was there. So George kept at it for a good part of the day, and I did what any young blood would do, is I got up and slugged him. Oh, well, I knew right then and there that things were going to change. So somewhere along the line, in a couple of days, they called me back to the union office in New Haven and said, it's a good idea if you go back to the Penn Central, and you can keep your seniority. So that was my career in the P&W. The only other thing I did over there is I was running a train. I was tied on. I had about 10 cars, and I was going to tie on to another track, another drag of cars. And I had the road foreman with me. His nickname was Deputy Dog, because he was a New Haven guy. A few years earlier than that, he was hiding in the bushes to watch a local train. And the engineer had his dog with him, and he stuck him in the window when they went by, the road foreman. So his name now is Deputy Dog. He's in a fireman's seat. So I hit the drag too hard, and I looked, and his cigar went out the door first. then his hat. But he was a big guy. He got stuck in the door, and that was it. He was not amused. So that was my career on the P&W. So now what we have today is a film. I was off the railroad for 4, 5, 6 years. So I would go back. The railroad had a severance package, because when they did away with the caboose, they had too many brakemen. So now they're going to get rid of brakemen. So I threw up my rights. By this time I had gone firing. I was an engineer trainee on the Conrail by this time. One good story about Conrail and being an engineer trainee. I'm running a couple of bud cars from New Haven, Connecticut to Springfield. Speed limit was 60 miles an hour. Now I'm going to go, next stop I'm going to make is in my hometown of Berlin, Connecticut. So there's a bridge before the station called Camel's Back. And that's where you would start to put the brakes on to stop at the station. Well, the speed limit, like I said, was 60 miles an hour. I was doing 80. So I started to put the brake on, but now on a bud car, if you put too much air on it, the brakes will release. You have what they call roller crowns, so you won't get flat wheels on them. So I did, the brakes, train wasn't slowing down, and I was getting close to the station. Put the window down, I got to the station, and I yelled out that I'll be right back. And I scanned the station, and I knew everybody. I get down a couple hundred yards, stop, back up into the station. People get on. I start moving right along, because now I got to make up some time. I hear a knock on my door. I open the door, and it's Mrs. Murphy. She was my high school teacher. Ugly woman. I was failing her class. I asked her to go to the prom just to see if I would pass the class. And I did pass. Mrs. Murphy's standing there, and she says to me, "Mr. Gurske, did you steal this train?" Her husband was a conductor, so she was quite familiar with trains. So that's the end of the stories. I'm going to show you a film today. I went back for a day to ride around on the NEP, which is the New England Produce Center in Chelsea, Boston. So I'm going to go down and ride around. There was a kid on the job. He was an engineer trainee. I had gotten him a job on Amtrak a few years earlier, and now he's the engineer trainee. Now he's with the regular crew, which are all guys I used to work with. So what we're going to do today is show you a rare film of the NEP. And what we do is we report to the NEP. There's an engine there. Switch out all the empties, and then take the empties to Beacon Park on the other side of the Charles. And then pick up the loads and go back and put the loads away, and then that's it. So we're ready to start. I had to clean up this film because there were a lot of bad words in the original.
And vegetable distributors in East Boston that served by rail for many years.
So I'm on the way over to the NEP, and I'm just chatting on the camera about where I am in a restaurant I used to have lunch in and that sort of thing. And we're heading toward Everett Junction. So now we're coming up to Everett Junction, which is underneath the highway. And past the Charlton Chew factory. Factory? I don't know if you call it a factory. This will go on for a few, not too long. Where's the water?
Right in front of you.
Right in front of me. So this was an interesting place to work. There's a lot of interesting people who control this place. And when we switch cars out, if somebody came out and wanted us to, let's say it's a loaded car, but he wanted it at a different spot, we were supposed to charge him $128 actually, but we never would. So these guys, every so often, would come along with presents for us. And it could be anything, usually booze. But if I caught the job spare, I couldn't accept the booze. It'd have to go to whoever owned the job. So Tobin Bridge, what I'm saying now is these are tracks. This would go down to a B&M yard. That's a B&M track there, and they had a junkyard around the corner. Guy here was there was a track in here. He was a salvage yard. So if a car came in, and let's say it had a load of bananas, and the cooling system was shut down. So now you got half the car rotten bananas. So you would bring it over to this guy, and he would take the rotten bananas off and salvage the good bananas. And then in front of this place on a weekend, there'd be a bunch of trucks with mom and pops. You know, these are the trucks you would see on the side of the road, people selling produce. This is where they were getting it. So they were allowed to pick the produce off the grounds before the rats got it. So it was quite a, and that doesn't mean they weren't any good, you know. And we're under Tobin Bridge here. We're heading over to the engine. Now I'm saying here, some of us here knew a man named John Clement, and John Clement kept a tugboat, steam-powered tugboat right in this area. This? Yeah, that's it. So this is a produce yard. Now rail fans can't get in here. This is a big deal. So now they'd have to pull all these trailers out at a certain time of the day. So it was quite an operation. So all your food stuff that comes into around Boston, this is where it comes. So I'm going to go down to the engine, meet the rest of the crew. Now again, I'm off the railroad now. I have nothing to do with it anymore. But we'd have to pull all these cars out, the empties, that'd be an empty. And we just pull them out to the lead, and there'd be no air in them, and just kick them out. Put the loads back in. And we had, it was like our own thing. We could report anytime we wanted to. It's just the deal was as long as you get the work done. I got called one day, and I was on a spare board. I lived in Maine at the time. I got called, and the train master wanted me to go down there with a set of keys and open up a gate. I drove down there, opened up the gate, and went home. Day's pay. So you can imagine the chaos in a place like this. Here's this piece of junk. Can the sound go on? This is the kid, Peter Gurske. He's the engineer training. So he's got to get that thing fired up for the day. He used to come up to he used to ride the caboose trains with us when he was younger. With, they owned the Western Pacific. What was her name? Her name Ken and Elena. They'd come up with them. So at this time, we could put in a good word and try to help you get a job. Now that those days are over. So we're going to wait for the rest of the crew. Engineer Davey Stewart, he lives in New Hampshire, so it's his regular job, and the brakeman, the head end guy. Davey Stewart just showed up. He's the engineer. I used to work with him. Yes. So we got a bunch of the cars for the B&M. For you guys that work on a railroad, this is before the three-step, and all you did is and Davey's talking on the telephone. You wouldn't do that today. After we got all the empties together, so that's, we're kicking the car out. After we get everything together, we're gonna go over to Beacon Park. This is the only connection between basically South Station and North Station through Cambridge. It's only a couple miles long, and it was called the $1 Million Mile because of the profits that that mile made for the New York Central. We're shoving in the loads. Now, of course, notice, I told you they have to move all the trailers at a certain time. Now, nowhere in the train, we're doing mostly everything with the independent, the engine brakes. Now what he's doing, he's spotting the cars at the doors for the warehouse. Now this changed this area a lot. They built a flyover over the, what is it, the Mystic? And we used to go over what was called Draw 7. That was taken out of service. That was gone by this time. Now the New York Central owned from Beacon Park, which is near South Station, they had a track that went over to Revere. And they had grain silos over there, so we were on their territory. Now we're going on the B&M, or MBTA, or whatever it is. So now we got to move along, because we're just in between your commuter trains. We're going over to Mystic now. There's parts of the old Draw 7. I do have film of that. That was quite an operation. So as we go around the curve here, we're headed right for North Station. This is a very busy area, and you really gotta pay attention. You gotta know what you're doing. And again, you have to move right along in here. You can't dilly-dally. Track to the left was the old B&M yard. I don't remember the name of it. It's, I think that's all gone now. We probably have about 20 cars behind us. Now we're going to go over behind the engine house. It's a new one. I hadn't seen it yet. So as we go along here, you're going to notice a facing point switch. And you won't be able to hear it good, but the engineer will tell a story about how we had a train get lost. And that facing point switch was lined for up the hill to the B&M Railroad. And the guys were coming along with this train one day, and they went up onto the B&M. And of course, the dispatcher couldn't find them. And we had a Conrail train lost on the B&M. I think it was yard 8 up there. But this is all new. It's a new facility. I filmed all the old stuff that was here. Where those passenger cars are is where they kept all the junk. But there were some neat things to see here. Not this particular day, but. So now we're going to cross over the Fitchburg, Maine. He's telling the story now of the track on the right. That's where one of our trains went. So we're going to cross the Fitchburg, Maine, and head toward Beacon Park. These switches are called, the old switches that were here were called Huey, Dewey, and Louie. One time I got a call from the crew dispatcher, and he wanted me to report to North Station. And what I was going to do is I was going to bring the office car special from North Station to Beacon Park, which was the Conrail's business train. So I reported, I went to Beacon Park, and the train master was going to bring me over there. And the rules was I had to dress up. So train master brings me over to North Station. I'm filming this whole thing, and I'm walking down to the hind end where I'm going to have to ride, and we're going to shove the train out. So I get down there, and I'm with the train master. And you can't get on a business train without being invited. So you have to wait for somebody to come out and invite you on board. And I can't go in the car unless I'm invited. And it was an observation car, so I'd be on the back of the car anyway. So the guys were starting to come out the door, and I introduced myself. So my name's Gary Gurske. I'm the conductor on the job today. I'm going to bring you over to Beacon Park. I'm also filming my career on the railroad. Do you mind if I take your pictures? The train master starts to turn red. So the guys get off the train, they line up, and I take their pictures. And it's Ernie Cross, superintendent. Next guy next to him was a guy named Dick Hasselman, vice president of operations. And then a guy named, I don't remember his name, he was president of the railroad, but not the chairman. They lined right up. Ernie Cross was the superintendent. He was a rail buff. And we were buddies. And he said, you know, blow up the picture and bring it to me in Springfield when you go by. So I did. So I've got all that on film. Brought him over to Beacon Park, and that was the end of it. Well, a month later, I'm on a job in Nevin's Yard, which is CP22 Framingham. And I'm on a work train. So we're in the yard, we're putzing around in the yard, and we're going to wait for the office car special that's going to go through. Now, when the office car special moves, the track speed limit is 60 miles an hour normally for like Amtrak. Office car special will travel at 70. So when they do that, you have to have somebody at each crossing because the gates won't go down in time. So there has to be another railroad guy at the crossings. So we hear the train coming. He's blowing for Framingham crossing there, CP22. And he gets close to Nevin's Yard, and he slows down. So I'm standing about 4 tracks in next to the work train, because everything has to be in the clear for the office car special. So they slow down, they're going about 5 miles an hour, and the hind end comes along, and out on the back of the train is the vice president of operations, Dick Hasselman. And he yells to me, "Mr. Gurske, where's my picture?" And the rest of the crew who I'm standing with are just freaked out over this whole thing. So I knew I could never get fired. So we're in, this is Beacon Park. None of this exists anymore. The yard is gone. This is the tower. This is, South Station is milepost 0, and this is milepost 3 to milepost 4. There's another baggage car like that in Framingham. And I was long after I quit the railroad. They called me up one day and he says, "You want this baggage car?" And I said, "You know, maybe Eddie Clark wants it." So we tried to get it, figure out how to get it up here, but it was just impossible to make that move. So we're going to pick up the loads and just go back and do a little switching, and then we're all done. So keep in mind, none of this exists anymore, this property. I was in Boston a few weeks ago, and it's a shame to see it. There was an engineer on the other train by the name of Billy Rhodes, and he was a descendant of, if you've ever seen, I don't know what I'm talking about now. It was a series by Ken Burns on the Civil War, and somewhere in that series, somebody read a letter from that period about somebody who got killed, I guess, and related to this guy, Billy. This is Davey Stewart. He's a regular engineer. He and I lived the farthest away from the park. So when you're on a railroad, you get an hour and a half if you're on a spare board. Or even by this time when you owned a job, they'd call you. So you get an hour and a half. But we were the only two allowed 2 hours because I lived in Maine and he in New Hampshire. So we're going back over to Charles. Storrow Drive. That road was a nightmare. Probably still is. Always be some truck wedged in on one of those low bridges. So we're crossing back over. Behind the engine house. There will be a little surprise there for us by the time we go by. It'll be a surprise for me, actually. So we're crossing the Fitchburg, Maine. Spent just as much time taking this ride over as we did switching, so. Now this is 2006. I left the railroad in '92. They bought off the brakemen, like I was saying. We got a nice severance pay. The younger guys got the severance pay. The older guys that were in their late 50s, early 60s, they could go home, but they only got a week's pay. The older guys got called back, and we got called back. There you go. So I'd taken the severance pay, which was a hefty, less than $100,000 in 92. And within 3 months, the railroad called me and asked me if I wanted my job back and you could keep the money. I said no. The railroad was changing, you could feel it. Once they did away with the cabooses, that was the first sign. And you really didn't, you know, when I hired out, there were so many guys on a crew, you were bumping into each other. You have to remember in the early days, and not too long ago, you had to have the engineer, fireman, head end brakeman, conductor, hind end brakeman, hind end flagman. So you had 3 guys in the caboose. So we've just gone over the flyover again. We're by the Charlton Shoe Factory. New York Central, again, they had a track that went over to Revere, over by the airport. New York Central had some silos over there. By this time, we were just going over there. There was a mobile oil storage facility. They'd get tank cars, and we'd go over there. Charleston Chew. I think it's apartments now. So we're going to do a little switching. Now again, train crews, like a well-oiled machine. Everybody knew where they were supposed to be. And if you did a job right, especially on Fridays on the railroad with a local, you'd want to get the work done so you'd get an early quit. Well, during the week, like on a Monday, railroads would be busy, so you'd work maybe 12 hours, which was overtime. But by Friday, work slacked off. So you run around, you know, and get an early quit, go home. I like riding on the back of boxcars. You can't do this anymore. You can't swing on and swing off a moving train, but it was actually weird for us to get onto a train that was standing still. This is dangerous. Especially in the old days when half of the crew was half in a bag. When I hired out on the railroad, within a week I was on a local freight. And we're coming back to Hartford. And the conductor stops the train. And he says to me, "What do you want to drink?" I said, "Oh, I'm not, you know, I don't want anything, thank you." He says to me, he says, "You know, we don't know who you are. You show up when the railroad is in bankruptcy. They're not hiring anybody. I can't even get my kid on the railroad, and you're here. We don't know if you're a company spy. You're going to drink." He goes over and buys me half a pint of booze, and I got to drink it. Part of it. That's it. Thank you very much. Any questions about anything?
Gary, when were you with Conrail?
Conrail, Penn Central was out in '76, and then Conrail started.
Were you with in '76?
Yeah.
I want to tell you these folks something. Okay? My name's Pete Dearness. In 1976, this guy was one of 5 people that delivered my first rail car in Ware, Mass. To the Mass Central Railroad.
Yeah.
I think he had a camera at the time.
I did.
Not sure. So isn't that
did.
interesting? To be 50, well, see, I incorporated that railroad December of '75, so this would have been June, July of '76, and he was the conductor. We got a carload of steel rod, a gondola full of steel rod about yo big, that went to a manufacturer, a tool shop called Ware Nipple in Ware, Mass., the western part of the state. And that was our first delivery of our rail cars. Thank you, Guy.
And we're still buddies all these years. I was going to, we were going to go up there, and I was running the engine, and I was going to run down to, where are we, Palmer? I was running down to Palmer, And on the other track, and Palmer's got a diamond, so we're stopped at the diamond at the station. And on the other side of the diamond is a high rail truck, Suburban, GMC or Chevy Suburban. And so they come across the diamond and it pulls up next to the engine. And it's Ernie Cross, who's the superintendent of the railroad. And he looks up at me and he says, "Who the F-bomb are you?" And I said, "I'm engineer training," so I just ran. He said, "Oh, okay." So this Ernie Cross, he was a superintendent in New York Central, the B&A. So when Penn Central took over, he inherited the New Haven. So very few people were familiar with him, the New Haven guys. I met him. I was in Springfield one day, and I'm just up there watching what's going on. I'm not on duty or anything. So I'm standing there, and a guy comes out of the station, and he says, "Mr. Cross wants to see you." You know, I had no clue, and this is after this event in Palmer. So I go up to Mr. Cross's office, and he says, "Where's your watch?" So it's summer, no short sleeve. I said, "No, I'm not on duty." I said, "I'm just watching to see what's going on because I got to get qualified here." He said, "You're on railroad property, you're supposed to have a watch." So he pulls out his watch, Hamilton. Now, at the time, I'm in the antique business on the side, so I know a lot about old stuff. Shows me the watch. So a railroad watch has a safety, not a switch, but a little thing you could push. So if you have the watch in your pocket or something, the hands won't turn. You can't have that if you're... So he shows me the watch, this and that, and so I said, "Oh, that's a Hamilton, it's a blah, this and that," and he says, "Oh." So all of a sudden, we're friends. He's got model trains, but he don't want anybody to know it. A lot of railroad guys are rail buffs, but they don't want other railroad guys to know it. And so we got along just fine. And again, he was on that office car special when I ended up there in North Station. So it was quite a career on the railroad, and like I said, things were changing, and you could feel it. And now you're on a local, and you know what you're doing. You're setting off, picking up, put the loads in, take the empties out. Everybody knows what they're doing. Now we're bringing people with us with stopwatches, and they're going to time your move. And it wasn't railroading anymore. It's just now you make a move, you get in between a car, you have to call for a 3-step. Call the engineer, he has to shut the general field off and put the throttle in neutral and do this and do that. There was no such thing as this, and you know, you didn't see people getting hurt. Everybody knew what they were doing. Just before I got on the railroad, in 1970, 1965, 66, 67, that's when they did away with people walking on top of boxcars, you know, for hand signals or lantern signals. And I saw that with guys, because they were still used to doing that. So you're making a move in like Hartford Yard, you got 15, 20 cars. And the guys are up on the roofs, and you're shoving in and passing signals. It was a thrill, an absolute thrill to learn from those old guys and do railroading the way it was. The railroad ran basically the same for 150 years. the next big change in that 150 years, other than steam to diesel, were radios. And that was it. And even when radios came out, the guys didn't like them. And they didn't always work until they put repeaters up all over the place. So you're switching, you're on a radio, and all of a sudden, you know, you can't hear anybody. So, all different, all different. Thanks again.
Well, thank you everybody for coming up to the show today. Thank you, Gary, for doing the presentation. Thanks, like I say, for supporting the society. Before you leave, if you want, we have donation table in the back. I don't want to lug that stuff back to us,